Shabbat Shalom. You may be seated. In my house, growing up as a kid, if I ever wanted to activate either of my parents, my dad or my mom, all I had to do was say one phrase that would stop them in their tracks. They would turn their heads, open their eyes wide, and I knew I had it coming to me. I was going to get a reprimand, a lecture, perhaps even a punishment if I dared to say this one phrase. And the phrase was, "It's not fair." My dad, who lost his father when he was 16 years young to a disease that had a medicinal cure brought to the public 6 months after he died, he knew a thing or two about not fair. And my dad was a congregational rabbi. Before that, a congregational cantor. So he was sadly very familiar with situations of gravely sick children or adults who had horrible luck. He knew about natural disasters that wiped out homes, and he even was familiar with nasty insurance carriers that found loopholes to not cover people's homes that were wiped out, all of which wasn't fair. My dad and my mom were born in 1934 and 1937, respectively. That means that they grew up in a generation surrounded by people who survived the Shoah. And inevitably, everyone who trafficked in their circles, whether it was in Canada, where my dad grew up, in Michigan, where my mom grew up, or any other town that they lived in their lives, they came in contact with people who had survived the Shoah, and every single person they came in contact with who survived the Shoah had someone very close to them who was killed during the Shoah. And they were killed solely for the crime of being Jewish and for the crime of living in proximity to Germany during what became World War II. So they knew a thing or two about fair and what was fair. My parents raised 4 kids during the 60s and 70s. They recounted to me from a time that I didn't remember well, but my brothers did, standing in line for hours waiting to get gas for their car so that they could get to work. They remember other moments of economic downturn in the country. They even lost their oldest son. So my parents, they knew a thing or two about the word fair. And if you wanted to activate them, you just tried that phrase right in front of them. It wasn't fair. When I was little, the retort always began, "Whoever said life was fair, David?" And then as I got a little bit older, and I could take on thicker topics, that phrase changed just this much. And it changed to this: "Whoever said God was fair, David?" From an early age, they reminded me something that, as we mature in adulthood every day, we become intimately familiar with. Sometimes life isn't fair. Sometimes life gives us things to deal with that aren't right, that don't feel just, and that are painful. Rabbi Kirshner, of blessed memory, wrote a recognized and best-selling book on this very topic called "When Bad Things Happen to Good People." It was compelled by him to be written because he had a child that was afflicted with a horrible disease called progeria, of which there was no cure. He died in his young teenage years, And he was a congregational rabbi, and he faced a litany of congregants who came forward and questioned the fairness of life and the fairness of God. And if you read his short book, you'll come to the conclusion that he cannot explain away why bad things happen to good people and the injustice and unfairness that life and God can sometimes provide. But he's not the only one who struggles with fairness. If we turn to the Talmud, the rabbis ask the question in one of the very first pages of conversation in all of the Talmud. In Brachot, page 5a, they ask the questions, Ma Yisurin, what is this affliction and this punishment that people have? Why is it that people get sick, or people have pain, or people are downtrodden, or people are hungry, or people are naked? Why does this happen? And the rabbis say, well, it's easy. Clearly, whoever is in that situation did something to deserve it. Well, then the people come back and say, okay, what if we retrace our steps, we look very closely at all we did, or even if it's someone young who couldn't have done anything to deserve it, what do we do then? How do we assign this blame in those moments? And the rabbis come back and they say, well, that's easy. It's because the person didn't study enough Torah. Well, what qualifies enough Torah? So then they come back again and they say, what if this person dedicated 20% of their days and their weeks and their lives to Torah study? What if this person was a Torah scholar? What if this person only studied Torah? And still, they are downtrodden, they are afflicted, they have injustice fall upon them. What then? What do we do then? And the rabbis say, oh, that's easy. They're afflicted and they have injustice and they're in pain and they're downtrodden because God loves them. And that's what God does to those that God loves. So at first they say, you did something to deserve it, and then quickly they turn all the way over to this is God showing you love, which comes down to the final answer that the rabbis had no clue why bad things happen to good people, why there is unfairness and injustice in our world. And it reminds us very early that the Torah isn't true. It says in this parsha, and we read it time and time after, V'haya'im shamoa, if you follow my commandments, if you listen to what I say, and the inference is good things will happen, your crops will be bountiful, it will rain in the proper season, all of what should happen should fall upon you. But we know that's not how it works. We know about lots of good people that have terrible things that happen to them. And we know of some not so good people that have really good things that seem to happen to them. And if you ever in this world want to see injustice, you want to see bad things happening to good people who don't deserve, well, just go to an oncology unit in any pediatric hospital in the world. What did any young person do to deserve such a horrible thing? But yet we know there are those in our world who commit these injustices, who do things that are bad and wrong, and the world seems to ignore it, or even times the sun shines on them beautifully. Heck, in some cases, they're even elected president twice. In the parsha we read today of Yitro, we are told of 10 commandments that the Jewish people should follow. 10 commandments that we are supposed to keep. They are different in nature. They are broken up between commandments that are between us and God and commandments between us and our fellow human being. They're also broken up into commandments we should observe and other commandments that we shouldn't commit. Like we should keep the Sabbath day, honor it, and make it holy. And of course, we shouldn't steal, we shouldn't lie, we shouldn't commit adultery. But nothing in the commandments tells us about fairness and justice. Nothing in the commandments tell us that everything's going to be great in our lives so long as we fulfill this. And if it doesn't even tell us that, we know, because there are people who follow the commandments and still bad things happen to them. And there are others who don't follow the commandments and good things seem to happen for them. So what do you do when people come to you in your life, at the water cooler, at the coffee shop, in the rabbi's office, and they chirp to you, "It's not fair. It's not fair that on our vacation that we've been looking forward to for an entire year and we saved up for, and I took the time off of work and got in advance of everyone else who wanted that same week, and I got it, that there was a hurricane that came down and our flight was canceled and we couldn't go on the vacation. It's not fair." And you know what? It's true. It's not fair. You work hard. You deserve a vacation. You followed all the rules. You should have that time, and it isn't fair. I'm just curious, though, for those who claim it's not fair. Would you feel just as comfortable saying that sentence, "It's not fair," to the person on the same flight that was canceled who was going to their sister's wedding and couldn't go now? Or how about the person who was trying to attend their father's funeral and that same hurricane stopped the flight? Or what about the person who had that same hurricane wipe out their home or their job? Is it still not fair to you that our vacation was lost? And will we be comfortable saying it? The world is full of things that are unfair. It's unfair that the day after we buy a stock, it tanks. It's unfair that the day after we sell a stock, it soars. It's unfair that the days that we schedule for a particular vacation could be riddled with bad weather and rain. It's unfair that sometimes things happen that are beyond our control. But what my parents were trying to tell me years ago is how juvenile it is to claim it's not fair when we know that our world can be unfair. There was a children's author by the name of Amy Krauss Rosenthal who wrote a brilliant children's book, and the title is "It's Not Fair." And each page of the book goes on to something that reminds us of what is unfair in life. It starts with a little girl, and she sees her sister with these gorgeous locks of hair, and she says, "I want curly hair. It's not fair." She wants a dog, but her mom is allergic, so she can't have one, and she says, "It's not fair." She wants to have perfect vision, but it's blurry, and she has to have glasses, and she says, "It's not fair." And then the book moves to inanimate objects. First to animals, which is, of course, an animate object, and it says of the chicken, "It's not fair that I have the responsibility to lay all the eggs." And then it moves to a stool looking at a chair, and the stool says, "It's unfair that the chair gets an extra leg, and I don't." It's a cute kid's book, but it's not the genius of it. The genius of the book is the ending. There's no fairy tale ending. There's no sweet completion. The book just ends. It's not fair. What better lesson is there for our kids to realize and for our Torah to remind us that sometimes life really isn't fair, and there isn't a whole lot of explanation behind it. Now, Judaism teaches us a lot about justice. And when Albert Einstein was asked, "What is it to be Jewish?" his answer was remarkable. He said, "To be Jewish, one must have an almost fanatical pursuit of justice. That was his definition of what being a Jew was about. But to pursue justice and to look to bring justice to the world is not about fair, because sometimes things don't work out fairly. I mean, tell Eve it really wasn't fair what the serpent did with the fruit. Or tell Sarah it's really not fair that you are riddled with jealousy because of Hagar and that you can't have kids. Or tell Leah it's really unfair that Jacob only married you so that he could also marry your younger sister and he wasn't even interested in you. Or tell Joseph it's really unfair that just because you had a dream that you were hated and almost killed by your brothers. Or tell Moses it's really not fair that you have arel sfatayim, you're not a good speaker. Or tell Moses I'm really sorry that the conditions required you to be set out for adoption. Or tell the Egyptians, for that matter, it's so unfair of all the plagues that happened to you and your people because of the hard-heartedness of Pharaoh's heart. Tell the Israelites who wandered how unfair life can be. Tell the Spaniards who were forced to convert or to leave how unfair it is. Tell the Russian Jews who were hunted by Cossacks, hey, it's unfair. Tell the person whose loved one was hit and killed by a drunk driver, it's unfair. Tell the person who was in the convenience store at the wrong time when it was being robbed how life is unfair. Tell the person who gets the diagnosis of cancer, it's unfair. Tell the person who lived in Be'eri or near Oz on October 7th about fairness. Fairness is not sameness. Fairness, in its proper definition, is freedom from bias, dishonesty, or injustice. So to be fair is to be just. That's guided by truth, guided by reason, and by justice. But whatever our outward circumstances are, how we choose to treat others with justice, with kindness, with goodness, that is where we have control over fairness. When people are selfish, when people are impatient, when people are greedy, when people act in ways that merely secure an advantage for themselves and don't think of others, that results in others being treated unfairly. And then it creates a cycle of things that can be wildly unfair. But not a thing, not one thing in our 10 commandments or in the other 603 of them that we learn, not a one of them tells us that life is indeed fair. What we learn is that God sometimes is unfair, maybe even cruel. And life can be unfair too. But we can also learn as adults, as we grow into maturity every day, about what we do with the moments that are beyond our control that seem unfair, and how to distinguish that between injustice and bringing a justice to where we can. There is no greater definition than from the Tanakh itself, from the book of Micah, that both Jews and Christians follow this line to a T, and when we do, it seems to bring some comfort, some stasis, some compass to the way in which we behave. Act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. When we bring fairness to a situation, when we bring justice to a situation, when we help the downtrodden, when we clothe the naked, when we feed the hungry, that's us acting with justice and with goodness and trying to ameliorate a situation of where unfairness has happened in the world. But to control fairness is a game we can never conquer. And to submit to it is to submit to reality and to adulthood. I think that's the greatest lesson that we can teach our children. The greatest message we can share with them is that sometimes life and circumstance and happenstance can be wildly unfair. But how we deal with that unfairness, how we bring justice to the world, that's where we can act godlike. And when we do, then we bring the words of Micah to fruition by walking humbly with our God. May we all walk that path together. Shabbat shalom, everybody.